Well, hello everyone, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I am Rick Song. I'm the board chair of the Advertising Club of New York and a proud member for, going on 20 years now. My day job is I'm the SVP and Group Head of Digital Sales at Nielsen. And thrilled to have you all here for our second episode of Conversations from the Ad Club of New York with a fellow board member and CEO of TWBHI Day New York, Nancy Reyes. The Ad Club and the International Andy Awards are committed to keeping this community connected, even while remote. We created this virtual clubhouse during the pandemic to really provide our members with continued online resources and connection. One of those is this series that you're watching right now. And in these webinars, I interviewed thought leaders on our membership about the most pressing topics of the day and get a glimpse into who they are as well. Before we get started, just want to encourage those of you who are not members, please join us. Our goal is to educate, celebrate, and empower our community. And you can easily do that by visiting theadvertisingclub.org. A couple of other housekeeping chores. We have some other important programming coming up in the next week, including a session on Monday, February 28th, in honor of Black History Month called Learning from the Past, Leading in the Present, featuring icons, rock stars, and innovators from our industry who will take a deep dive into how their career journeys have guided them in leading our industry forward in this new era of advertising. We also have an offering, Succeeding in a Hybrid Work for Managers on Tuesday, March 1st. Led by a coach from Strong Training and Coaching. Please join us for that. That's going to be cool. Also, feel free to socialize the content from today's session and tag us at Ad Club New York. Now, please join me in welcoming Nancy Reyes. Nancy.
Hi, Rick.
How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing great. How are you, Rick?
I'm doing great. And first day back at the office, from what I understand, right?
It is our first day back in the office in New York, so you may actually hear ambient noises around, which I'm not sorry about because it's really nice to have noise around us.
For sure, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for being here. You know, I personally am excited to be with a fellow city kid and native New Yorker, and of course, fellow Ad Club board director. Your journey has been quite dynamic to CEO of TBWHI Day New York. So let's take it from the beginning. Your experience growing up in New York City and how you got into advertising.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about it. I grew up in Queens, in Long Island City, which didn't look like it looks now. And then I ended up in Richmond Hill, Queens, later on through high school. But I think my journey with advertising actually started when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, because I was picked up by a program called Prep for Prep, which I am a major advocate of and a true supporter of. And Prep for Prep helps inner city kids of color get on a track to attend private school in New York City, given the discrepancy between public school and private school. So in 5th grade and 6th grade, we all underwent sort of extra school, additional curriculum in order to catch up as much as we could to kids that were in private school. And then we ended up, in private schools here in New York City, which was such an honor and a privilege to attend. And the amazing thing about Prep for Prep is that it follows us throughout our journey, even sort of once we graduate the program into high school, into college, and introducing us to all sorts of fields and industries that certainly I would have never been exposed to otherwise. So when I graduated from college, they actually let me know that there was an agency in New York, it was Ogilvy, who was looking to diversify their employee base, and would I be interested in exploring an advertising career. So had it not been for Prep, I would have never ended up in advertising. But that's how I started in the business, actually. And that was now 1997.
That's fascinating that it's a program for, I'm completely enthralled with it. So I'm excited to learn more and how I can participate, but it follows you through, right? Because I think in beginning in that 5th or 6th grade environment, it led you to high school and then to Harvard, right? So then, and then carried you through to the career stage, which usually there's a the organization will focus on a specific life stage, but this one kind of follows you through the process, which is fascinating. So is that typical? Is it typical that it comes, right up to when you're starting your career as well?
It does, and beyond that. So through Prep for Prep, I was able to secure paid internships when I was in high school and when I was in college over the summer, which again, otherwise wouldn't have been possible for me. The program still does that today for all of the students that are a part of its curriculum, a part of its alumni base. And then there's an opportunity for all of us to continue to contribute to Prep for Prep throughout our career. So we have the wonderful privilege of having an internship program with Prep for Prep every year here at TBWA We hired some of the interns from Prep for Prep who work with me here at the company, which is such a terrific honor. We're helping Prep for Prep ensure that it can continue recruitment efforts at the agency. So it's just a wonderful cycle that continues throughout many of our lives.
So it's fascinating and so inspiring. And so that's probably an opportunity for members, right? For member orgs to participate in Prep for Prep and being one of those companies, right? That sponsors candidates, interns, or what have you throughout that cycle.
Absolutely. Again, if it wasn't for Prep, I don't think that advertising would have been something that would have naturally come to me. There was really no track for that through high school, through college. And when I was growing up, I didn't think about advertising. I didn't even consider it as a career. So the opportunity to expose many young children of color and high school students and college students of color to industries that they may not be exposed to otherwise is a wonderful opportunity for any brand or company that's looking to do so.
So true. Advertising as a major or a focus, or media as a major, marketing as a major. Advertising in particular is one that hasn't had a focus, I think, historically. It's something we've learned at the club, but I think more in recent times, there's been more curriculum, more schools focus. A few high schools actually will have, some agenda around advertising, which is exciting. So I'm assuming for Prep for Prep and throughout those stages in your career, that mentorship was a big part of that, whether you were serving as a mentor, but also receiving mentorship. Can you talk about how mentorships played a role in your career?
Sure, I think it absolutely has. It's always true. And I think we're sort of facing that today in the advertising world, that seeing someone older than you, more senior than you, that looks like you is almost a built-in mentor, because so many of us lack that in the advertising profession and normally most professions, I think, in the country. So in general, I think Prep for Prep was built with that. There was always somebody to look up to, somebody who had done it before you, somebody who could sort of help carve a path. I think once I got into my career and worked at different agencies and companies, there have always been people that have looked out. And there's been an interesting conversation about the difference between a mentor and an advocate. And I sort of always love the advocate route more, because it's the person who is talking about you when you're not in the room, and how they're talking about you and how they're promoting you and how they're advocating for you, how they're fighting for you, what's being said when you're not there, which sometimes matters as much as what's being said about you when you're in the room. And so I had a number of advocates, and all of the companies that I worked at, from Ogilvy to Goodby, and of course now here at TBWA Chiat. So it's a twist, I think, on mentorship, which might be at times for some people more valuable than the mentorship itself. Couldn't agree with you more. I also think that having a span of mentors, kind of your own board of directors that each has kind of different expertise or discipline, or even come from different walks of life or disciplines is super important too. So you always have different perspectives, and not just in one industry or one area of focus. So well said. So you're an inspiring story from a career perspective to reach the pinnacle of CEO. How would you describe that path, and what kind of advice would you give to those aspiring to be in the C-suite? Yeah, I wish I felt like I had like the 5 tips to be a CEO speech right now, but I don't, because I landed in advertising somewhat by accident. It wasn't something that I had, dreamed up my whole life. I think I just gave myself the goal of one step at a time. That's always the way I've been. I've not been like, where do I see myself in 5 years or 10 years? I think I've always just looked right in front of me. So I just kept thinking, am I enjoying what I'm doing? Am I learning? Do I like who I'm working with? Do I like who I'm working for? If I could answer those questions all in the affirmative, then I would keep going. That was honestly my sort of my more immediate goals. I think the other thing was just the more that I liked what I did, the more that I wanted to study it and learn about it and be a student of the trade. I really believe in being a student of what you love, of what you believe in. If you're working with a brand, if you're working on a project, if you're working in an industry that maybe you don't know much about, how do you continue to learn and be curious about it? And the more that you exercise that curiosity muscle, I think the more that you can advance, because you'll really understand what you're truly after, what you truly love to do, what you don't love to do. So that was really how I approached it. Do I love what I do today? Am I curious enough to continue to do it? And where does that curiosity lead me and take me moving forward?
And I mean, clearly you became passionate over time, because your resume includes a long list of illustrious agencies, from Ogilvy to Darcy, Goodby, and now obviously your role as CEO of TBWA, Chai Day, New York. What insights can you share about becoming CEO that you can share with our membership?
I think maybe one of the most important lessons I've learned is how to live on the other side, at least from an agency person perspective. So somewhere along the line, my career was interrupted. I actually started up the original office for Goodby in New York, and it didn't work out. And I found myself at a real sort of tipping point, a failure point, where I'm like, this is not where I thought I was going to be. I thought I was going to retire with this company. This is where I had imagined the rest of my life happening. And I was pretty low. And I decided to do something totally different. And I went on the client side. So I spent about a year at Verizon working for the wireless team in the marketing world. And that's when I realized I wasn't done yet, or I wasn't nearly done, because while I had always fancied myself somebody who was very good with the brands and very good with clients, I think I fell short in that capacity when I realized just how much there was to learn when you sort of sat in somebody else's shoes, sat on the other side of it. So I think that would be probably a big piece of advice I would give, is to just get on the other side of whatever you're working on, whatever you're striving for. Make sure you just flip it a little bit to understand the sort of total picture of what you're working on. That client side experience for me was monumental. And then to be able to come back into the agency world and bring that experience with me, I think I just grew in that 1 year more than I've ever grown at any point in my 25-year career.
Well said. Different point of views, I think, is a key message there, and also the fact that how do you pivot when things don't go the way that you had thought, and what can you learn from it, right? And I think that's also a great lesson. Thank you for sharing that. So, given your deep agency experience, how would you describe the state of advertising today?
It's a good time to ask that question. There's so many ways to answer it, honestly. I mean, one, from a business perspective, I think there's never been a better time for advertising, but I say that almost every day. Because if we strip back what advertising is all about, it's about creativity, it's about ideas. And there's never a better time for creativity or ideas than right now. And I'll probably say that tomorrow, and I'll say that in a year, because ideas are what progress us forward. As a group of humans, as a business, as a set of brands. So I always think that there's a place and a time for creativity and ideas. So I do think the state of advertising is very, very good. I also see many brands leaning into their partnerships with agencies. That's when I think you're working with really good partners on both sides, when you lean into the partnerships that you have to help progress us all forward. We're all coming out of the pandemic and trying to figure out what's next. Where are we going? What do we take with us? What do we leave behind? What did we learn? All of that stuff is happening to all of us at the same time. So the more that we find partnerships to do that with together, I think the better off the industry is. Where I think there's opportunity, and there's a ton of conversation happening, right this moment about the state of partnership between agencies and clients, is just how do we, as an advertising group, come together as a community more. I think we all default to competing with one another. That's just sort of the state of human nature, I suppose, is that we're meant to kind of battle it out with one another, and try to just, beat somebody out with price or beat somebody out with a better idea. And I think what I'm yearning for, what I'm hoping for, is that we actually come together more as a community of advertising and marketing professionals on how do we progress the state of advertising and marketing forward, from everything from when it comes to DE&I to how we partner with clients to what we're paid for, how ideas are valued. All of that stuff will progress faster and better if we look at each other as a larger community than as entities that battle one another.
It's a great point. And I think, having said that, then what does an agency have to do to remain competitive, given what you just described?
I think I would say there's two things that are pretty related. One is to have some self-respect. I really do. I really think that we can't forget what agencies provide, and that is perspective, that is creativity, that is ideas, and we should respect ourselves enough to know the value of that. I think that is critical, I think, for our industry. The second thing that I would say is, in order to stay competitive, look within the company itself, look inside the company itself, versus at all of the people that you want, the brands that you want, everything that exists outside the company. So often I think we are influenced by that. We want this, we want that, we move here, we move there. And are we doing that and sacrificing what's already inside the company? That's just a general question. I know here at TBWA, that's what we're focusing on, is our people, our brands, our culture, our client, like everything inside the company. And the true belief that everything that we need in order to succeed in the future is already in the company today. What if you thought that way? How much more quickly would you advance? It doesn't mean you don't pitch for business. It doesn't mean that you don't attract talent from the outside. It just means that you start with a foundation of what you already have, and you learn to appreciate and treasure that. I think that actually makes us more competitive. In addition to the point I made earlier, which is, let's look to the left and to the right at other agencies around ourselves and form community. To get more competitive, I think maybe we have to be more of a community, which sounds at odds with what the question is, but I think it might be a different way to look at it.
No, I totally agree. I think, to your point on self-respect, there are parts of the agency side and the media side, I think, as an example, has been seeing compression for the last 10 to 15 years with the advent of programmatic, consolidation, et cetera. So do you feel like ad agencies are feeling that same compression? Is it synonymous, or is it different?
I don't think this is new news. I think it might have felt at times stronger during the pandemic, at times, not as intense. I think maybe what's different, or how we should look at what the difference is that, is there a new generation of leadership that's coming in, at this moment in time over the past 5 years and the next 5 years, that can progress this conversation maybe more quickly than in the past? That's how we have to look at it. There's always been the pressure of procurement, the pressure of pricing, the pressure of competition, the pressure of undercutting one another. That's, I think, what I'm challenging is, can we not compete with one another that way, but can we lift the entire value of what we all do by not competing with one another? And then the second thing is, what kind of legacy does the current leadership want to leave behind? Do we want to solve this problem, or do we want to pass it on?
Yeah. Well, I think you also answered that with your notion of community, in terms of how do we build community. That's one of the things we're trying to do at the Ad Club. So come join us, everybody. Anyway, on that note, are there common themes that keep surfacing, right, as an agency CEO, that from the clients, the self-respect issues aside, but from a business perspective, are there common themes that continue to surface? I'm assuming many of them have been related in the last 2 years, at least, to what's been happening with the pandemic. But what are some of those common themes or challenges that are continue to surface from the clients?
Sure. I think there's some business stuff and some marketing stuff. So on the business stuff, we may have some clients who are trying to figure out what their future is. It sort of on the other side of the pandemic, supply and demand issues, just like most companies and industries are going through right now. So how do they survive that? What is the value and the role of the brand in a time when sometimes my product may not be available? How do I rely on the value of the brand itself to sort of push the company forward? So I think there's a really interesting look at brands today and the role of the brand. I think from another perspective on business, there is a pretty significant increase in CSR, and that's great. And can private companies actually push the CSR movement faster and better than we can if we sort of look at it from a government picture? So I think there's a big topic of CSR. Within CSR, of course, there's DE&I. That's another big business imperative that is true for agencies as it is for brands alike. So I think what I like about the shift in what's happening is not only is it about the dollars and cents, which I think we've always known and we know we have to care about, but rather what is the impact of this brand or company in the world, on the environment and social issues? How are we going to leave this planet when we leave it? That's where I'm seeing the shift, which is refreshing and remarkable, because I think we've all been wanting this moment in time where we say, does it take a pandemic for us to make big progressive moves? And if it does, great, but then let's take advantage of it. It's not something we want to waste, but certainly there's a big commitment to CSR.
On that kind of similar thread, I think it's fair to say the agency universe is fragmenting, right? Whether it's consulting companies picking up work, private equity becoming more involved. Blackstone is one of them. In a recent Ad Age article about work that you're doing with Blackstone, Blackstone-based backed company called Sphera, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yep.
Sphera. You were quoted as saying, creating the conditions and figuring out the right partnerships based on other criteria feels like a much more modern way of looking at things. Can you expand on that as it relates to kind of Blackstone and the private equity phenomenon?
Sure. I find the Blackstone initiative just a really powerful message, I think, to the entire industry overall. Here you have an incredible, successful company who understands that there is a value to the brand that can increase the overall value of companies. That's why they formed a brand transformation group. The head of that is Johnny Bauer, who is a well-regarded ex-CSO from Droga, and his job is to make sure that brand transformation is a part of the companies that are sort of put back out into market. And so that's one thing, is the value of brand transformation and the fact that private equity companies are seeing that. Is that a message that we all should be listening to? That's number one. The second thing is that the process by which they select agencies to work with just feels like a more humane and just more intelligent way to choose agency partners. I think that, Johnny Bauer was quoted somewhere as saying that it's impossible for any company, any agency to get to know another brand, in the short amount of time that we're all pitching. And is there a different way to approach a partnership? Is it something where we simply understand what we're trying to solve together? There's a little bit of work and thinking and conversation that goes to say, do we have the same values? Do we believe in the same things? Do I respect your approach to how you might solve the problem or the opportunity that's in front of me? And then based on that, then we continue on to a conversation or potentially a relationship. And that's how Sphera was introduced to us. That's part of the relationship that we've got with Blackstone, and that Blackstone is looking to have with other agencies in the industry. I just have a lot of respect for that. I think it's a new and fresh way to look at pitching and working with agencies. There's got to be much more humanity to the way that it's happening now. It's exhausting many agencies.
Does that support your sense of kind of community kind of coming together around working with agencies? Is that part of that? Is that part of that structure, in your opinion?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Is there a new way to look for and work alongside, agencies? And it's lessons for agencies and clients, alike, by the way. It's not a one-sided thing. But I think, we've probably been sitting around having this kind of a conversation for a while now. Is there a better pitching process? Is there a way we're not all undercutting one another? And the way Blackstone is approaching things, it just feels like it might be something for many of us to be paying attention to.
Well said. Well said. All right, let's switch gears to leadership specifically. We've gone through, obviously, needless to say, tumultuous times the last couple of years. But in general, it's challenging to keep talent inspired and motivated in this environment. How have you been able to achieve that when everyone is suffering from remote working fatigue, pandemic fatigue, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, this is a good question. And Rick, I think the first thing is to just admit the vulnerability around it. It's been challenging. And I think I'm okay saying that. I'm okay saying I've been challenged. I'm okay saying that I have also struggled with keeping momentum up and motivation up. And so if I'm feeling that, I can only imagine what the people overall are feeling. So I think number one is just acknowledging it and acknowledging that, there is no one answer to this. And anybody who says they have the answer is just lying and wants attention. We have to kind of tackle it day by day, one step at a time, and maybe not expect so much all the time from ourselves and from each other. The thing we went through recently is, when we were thinking about coming back into the office for those of our employees who do come into our office, is how are we going to look at this a little bit differently? Where are we going to find, the additional motivation? Again, not to say we're going to ignore the fact that it's hard, but like, how do we come out of it? And we simply just applied our methodology to it. We've got a methodology called disruption. That's what TBWA is known for. At its very core, we look at something called conventions. Those are widely held beliefs or behaviors that exist, so much so that we imagine there's no other way to look at it but the way that exists today. And then what helps us push against that and reach something greater in the future is what we call disruption. So do we need to look at some of the things today that are happening as, they're true, they're real, they're facts, but can we just accept them so that we can move on and move past them? So for example, the idea that we need something new from the outside all the time to keep us motivated. Is that just something, can we push against that? Is that the only way that something can be true? The other point is the Great Resignation. That couldn't be more real. Certainly we've struggled with that as well. But if we know that that is true, how else can we look at that? So that's where our inspiration came from. If there's all of these exterior forces that we can't control, that we must accept, that are true, that are real, that people are feeling, there's nothing we can do about those things, but we can do something about what's inside the company. So can we look inside the company and say, the future is already here. We're going to win from within. That's how we're going to push past some of these conventions, some of these issues, some of the lack of motivation and energy that we feel, to say, let's look inside, take care of our people, take care of our clients, take care of our culture. That's where we look for inspiration, not the outside world, because that we can put our arms around, that we can do something about. That is the method that we used. It certainly breathed a bit of new life for me. And I'm hoping as we come back today into the office here in New York and in other parts of our country, that serves as a little bit of motivation, as a starter bit, if you will, for the rest of our employees.
Love it. I love it. We're win from within. So Ad Club folks, let's get t-shirts made for that. That's a great quote. Having said that, so I think everything you said is spot on. It's a dynamic environment, so we do have to look from within. How is that pivoted? This is a question that came in through the chat box. How is that pivoted to your recruitment of creative talent? How has that kind of altered that process and finding, obviously, retention, but also finding great talent?
Yep. So a few things to that. I think, as with anything, It doesn't mean that it's the only thing we'll do. It means it's where our center of gravity is. So first of all, we want to make sure, for example, if we've got a position open at the agency, that the entire agency knows about that position being open, so that we're actually looking inside to our own talent. Maybe we're promoting people from within the company before we go and hire from the outside. Let's make sure, again, we take care of our people, develop and grow them as much as possible before we look to bring them in, bring them in from the outside. It doesn't mean, though, that we're not going to bring in, or we're not going to try to attract talent, because there are certain things we have to accomplish that we're not yet there on. DE&I is one of them. Again, this is an industry-wide problem. It's an America-wide problem, but we certainly want to make sure that we are not just growing and developing talent here, but that they have people to look up to. Remember, that was my whole big thing when I was growing up. If I didn't have somebody to look up to that looked like me, it was going to be very hard for me to keep going, because I would think, what's the point? So let's make sure we're also creating opportunities at the very top, not just at the entry level position or the mid-level position. It's got to be all the way through.
That's a perfect segue to my next question on the topic of DE&I. As challenging as the last 2 years have been on many areas, pandemic, racial injustice, social unrest, et cetera, one of the things that is encouraging is the level of activism that has risen to the surface. And I think it's made companies take, call it a more important, significant investment in making change towards DE&I initiatives. Where are we right now? Like how 2 years, fast forward 2 years, lots of talk, lots of announcements about investments from across the industry, advertising in particular. Where are we, in your opinion? Have we done enough? What else needs to be done?
I don't think we've done enough. I don't think we've done nearly enough. And part of me feels like I certainly need to keep believing that and saying that. Otherwise, it's really easy, and we've seen it happen before, for our industry, our country, to take our foot off the gas on this particular issue. So I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be. However, I think a few things have happened. You've mentioned a couple of them, but some additional ones that give us some hope. Number one is we do need to acknowledge progress, because it is a major issue. And sometimes what happens, and I'm guilty of this, is that in acknowledging how much more we have to go, we don't acknowledge the steps that we've made to move ahead. And if we don't acknowledge them, we can all lose hope really quickly, because there's a lot to do. So I do think the fact that there is more conversation happening, that there are actions, that there are commitments being made, is helpful. I think where we're lacking is accountability. How are we keeping track of the commitments that we're making? Who's holding us accountable? Are we holding ourselves accountable, or do we really need, for example, clients to hold us accountable? I'd rather hold myself accountable than feel like I need somebody else to do that for me. So I think there's still room to grow when it comes to accountability. One thing that we've learned is when we started our sort of rebirth of our DE&I efforts here at the agency, in 2020, is we started up a lot of programs and a lot of activities, some of which have remained and some of which have fizzled out. The big learning that we had over the past year is that if DE&I is not built into your business objectives, it will not have sustainable success, because it's just bolt-on stuff. Unless you believe and you can truly prove that DE&I is going to move your business forward. So is it a part of your business objectives? It is a part of win from within for us. We cannot win from within if DE&I is not part of our company. So doing that work, which sometimes feels like we're slowing it down, but really what we're doing is making sure that it is integrated into our business objective to make it more sustainable, more long-term, and to hold ourselves accountable with many more KPIs that are not just quotas, which I feel oddly conflicted about. On the one hand, I think we do need to see, have we increased representation from this number to this number? The reason I'm conflicted about representation and quotas is because that's only one piece of it. We can certainly increase the population of underrepresented people that we have at the company, but if we are not creating a safe environment for them to succeed, to explore their ideas, then it's not going to work. So quotas is just one part of it, but there's a whole employee experience that has to happen in a company in order for it to actually succeed.
It's interesting because I think the business dynamics and benefits, if you will, of having a more diverse strategy or having a more diverse approach to the marketplace has long been proven, right? From a business dynamics, from a consumer dynamics, population, et cetera. However, it's almost taken, kind of the extreme for, real change to happen. At least it feels like it. The fact that conversations are happening and you're actually seeing more diversity in senior leadership roles, across the industry is truly inspiring, and more recognition. I can tell you on a personal level, the fact that we have sensitivity around even discussing race or not being afraid to discuss diversity is a big deal. I'm very proud at Nielsen. I think we've taken it, Sandra Well, our Chief Diversity Officer who serves on the board as well. I think she's done a lot of great work to make sure this is a priority, not like a nice to have, which I think the industry is long. It's been a nice to have for the industry for a long time, but also putting our money where our mouth is with inclusion analytics, which is a solution that really just helps identify representation in streaming content. So I agree with you. It's we're making the steps, but we still have to do a lot more. When you think about that, so this is actually another question that came in, but I think it's very relevant. When you think about the agency landscape, what are the progressive moves? You kind of talked about from a DEI lens, but what are some of the progressive moves you'd like to see the industry take on to kind of make change or to evolve as an industry?
I still think we need more senior leadership representation. I think that too often I think I'm asked what it's like in the industry as a Latina CEO, and I'd love to just be asked what it's like as a CEO. I think we haven't made that shift, right? There's still a qualifier about me, for example. So I think that's only going to change when there are many more of us in senior leadership positions. I think we're making progress at the top, and we're making progress at the entry level. I don't see us making that progress as much in the middle, which means we're losing talent. And I think the other thing which I mentioned is I'm not sure we've yet had an enriching conversation about what it means to create a safe environment for people. What does that mean, not just for those of us who are underrepresented coming into companies, but for everybody around us? What does true accountability mean? Are we looking at enough different people to help the movement and the cause, or are we looking at the same people to help the cause over and over again? That's when it starts to shift. When you see sort of a broader group of people taking the movement into their own hands, than a bigger group of the same people that you'd come to expect. I think that's where I think we haven't moved enough yet. And what does it mean? Again, I don't know that we've explored this totally yet, to have all of these dynamic ideas, all of these diverse dynamic ideas. How does that change what creativity looks like for the better? How does it evolve it? How does it move it forward? What kind of open conversations can we have with brands about that? I think there's just a lot more creative expression that needs to be explored and needs to be welcomed.
Well said. And to your point about your recognition as a CEO versus a Latina CEO, female CEO, I totally agree. I think, but from a culture perspective, from a cultural transformation perspective, the nuance of people being sensitive to that, right, helps affect change, right? It helps become the norm. That's why representation is important. It helps affect the norm versus being that Asian guy or that Asian sales leader or that, you know what I mean? I think, but anyone who's a person of color, we know what that's like, right? We know how we are identified automatically. So I think it's a great point. As we wrap up, I could talk all day with you guys. This has been fascinating. I guess there's one question that came over and tell me if it resonates with you. Are there any new technology investments that the agency has made to deliver on for client needs? I should say, is there one, or is there a new kind of technology investment or innovation that you're looking forward to serve the needs of the clients?
Yeah, well, I would say we've been actually investing in innovation throughout for a while. I think that was one of the, to be honest, one of the strong suits about the agency and why we came out and through the pandemic in such a healthy, strong, in a strong way, because we were investing in innovation, technology, for creative ideas, for data, for cultural insights. All of that stuff was happening throughout the pandemic itself. So actually, it just became a very natural part of the company. We have a wonderful cultural engine called Backslash, which helps to identify emerging trends that are happening all over the world in different industries. And we published something called Edges. We just published it. Actually, maybe it was last week, which just shows, what are the latest things that are happening that we need to pay attention to as we move into this sort of next era for the world. So innovation's always been a part of it. I would say it's hard to single one thing out that says this has made the difference, but rather maybe a culture of and a belief in innovation as a whole versus one specific thing.
Well said, well said. And I think you were recognized, right? Adweek Agency of the Year, right? In 2021.
Yeah, Global Agency of the Year. Yep.
It's amazing, amazing. Congratulations. All right, so as we close out, as we kind of kicked off your returning to the office for the first time in a while, in some time, what are you most excited to get back to, on a normal basis?
I think that it sounds very simple, but I think it's so valuable, and that is just seeing people. It makes all the difference to walk down the hallway today or up and down the steps and see so many wonderful people, and when they're comfortable, give a hug or a handshake. I think we cannot underestimate the power of human connection and human touch, and just seeing one another and being in each other's presence. I sort of warned all of you that there might be ambient noise today, and that was a pretty wonderful feeling to walk into the office today and it be noisy. I've never wanted it to be noisier than I do now. So it has been a very warming, comforting, wonderful feeling. It makes me feel like everything is going to be okay.
I couldn't agree with you more. I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. With that, I think we'll draw a great conversation to a close. Nancy, thank you so much for making time in your first day back in the office. It's a thrill to have you here. For our Ad Club members, we'll be posting this online, so the recording will be available. If you have any questions, reach out to us at theadvertisingclub.org. Don't forget our next conversations which is also with fellow board mentor and one of my mentors, Carl Fremont, the CEO of Quigley, on Wednesday, March 30th. To echo Nancy's point, we're hoping to do that one in person. So I hope you'll stay tuned for more about it. Thanks again, Nancy, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.